This keynote opened the NetEvents 2017 Global Press Summit in California, which brings together press, analysts and vendors in the networking and telecoms markets. The opening topic was cybersecurity, and it focused on the new hackers and how to defeat them using expertise from the secret and intelligence services. And to bring that high level of expertise to people in the security and networking technology markets were three practitioners from the CIA, the FBI, and the US Secret Service. Analyst Alan Zeichick opened the session. He said that we would be looking at hackers through the eyes of law enforcement experts whose job it is to catch those hackers and throw them in jail.
And to start things off, we have three experts here who I had a wonderful opportunity to talk with this morning, and they blew me away with not only their knowledge, but also with their willingness to share that knowledge. And so let me ask them to take just a few minutes to introduce themselves, what they do, and what their organization does, because particularly for our non-US friends, you may have heard of these organizations, but may not really know what they do. So let me start with MK.
Alan Zeichick introduced the three security and intelligence experts, MK Palmore, Michael Levin, and Dr. Ron Layton, and posed his first question.
Some people stole a whole bunch of emails from the Democratic National Committee. Some people stole 143 million people's worth of personally identifiable information. I'm assuming that those may not be the same groups of hackers or criminals or whatever we call them. There are different motivations. I know there are activists, or hacktivists as sometimes called. You have organized crime, you have petty crime, you have terrorists, you have all sorts of different groups. I'm wondering if you guys, as the professionals, can help us understand, in today's world, the modern hacker. It's not one homogeneous group. Who are they, and what do they want, and how does knowing that help us? Who wants to go first?
Sure, I'll take a stab at this. So I think that for the purposes of this discussion, there's essentially four groups of cyber threat actors that you need to be concerned with. I break them down as financially motivated criminal intrusion threat actors, nation states, hacktivists, and then those security incidents caused by what we call the insider threat. When you keep it sort of segregated into those four areas, I think you will find naturally the most prolific computer network intrusion activity throughout the globe. The most prevalent of the four that I listed, and the most impactful typically, are those motivated by financial concerns. First of all, we're talking about a global landscape, and the barrier to entry for most financially motivated cyber threat actors is extremely low. In terms of looking at who these folks are, in terms of who's on the other end of the keyboard, we're typically talking about mostly male threat actors, sometimes between the ages of, say, 14 and 32 years old. We've seen them as young as 14. A lot of times self-taught, with access to information, sitting in a global environment, and with a platform like the dark web available to them, they have access to a limitless amount of exploits and information that they then use to carry out their fraudulent activities. And they do it with near 100% anonymity. And because anonymity is such a huge factor in cyber threat activity nowadays, it presents a problem for those of us on the law enforcement end of the spectrum in terms of our ability to close the gap, to find attribution, and ultimately get these folks into the U.S. criminal justice system. Nation-state activity. Oftentimes when talking about this subject, most in the business world, unless they're a defense contractor or have a specific reason why they think their intellectual property might be the target of nation states, there's a little bit of pushback oftentimes from the business sector because folks just can't believe that their business or what it is that they consider their main competency might be the targets of a nation state threat actor. And what we are here to tell you is that with time to discovery of security incidents extending well beyond 180 days, that point where you're being told by law enforcement that your network is being intruded upon by a nation-state threat actor is not the time to figure out how to create defenses to stop nation-states from stealing your information. They tend to be the most complex in terms of their capabilities and most capable, and we've seen through the course of investigations, one being the Yahoo investigation that one of my teams concluded this year, we're seeing a combination of criminal threat actor activity with nation states, basically creating what I like to call a super team of cyber threat activity. And so as consumers and business owners, folks should be worried about what that looks like in terms of future impact, because we're talking about limitless capabilities in terms of a nation state being able to go into its own treasure in order to support these activities, with a combination of almost limitless capability from criminal intrusion threat actors.
You know, the interesting thing is, now that I'm in the private sector, I have a different perspective. And I would say for your readers and the people that you're working with, they don't care if it's a nation state. They just want to stop the bleeding. They don't care if it's a hacktivist. They just want to get their site back up. They don't care who it is. They just are trying to fix the problem because it means their business is being attacked, or they're having some sort of a failure, or they're losing data. They're worried about it. So from a private sector company's business, they may not care. Law enforcement cares because they want to try to catch the bad guy. And that's very relevant to some of the conversation here. So what we are trying to focus on in the private sector is how do we help businesses to harden the target. You know, many of these attacks are, you know, no different than a car break-in. You know, a guy breaking into cars is going to try the handle first before he breaks the window. And that's what we see with a lot of these hackers. It doesn't matter if they're nation states. It doesn't matter if they're script kiddies. It doesn't matter to what level of the sophistication. They're going to look for the open doors first, and they're going to do their intelligence. So we're seeing a lot more of that. So we like to talk about the concept of, you know, how do we work with private sector and law enforcement to help businesses to lock the doors better.
The Secret Service deals almost exclusively with the financial sector, with the banks. So several decades ago, there was a famous United States bank robber named Willie Sutton. Willie Sutton was asked, why do you rob banks? You know what his answer was? Because that's where the money is. And so those are the people that we deal with. The U.S. Secret Service has about a 25-year history of electronic crimes. We're good at this. We know what we're doing. The first electronic crimes task force was established in New York City 25 years ago. So think about that trajectory in terms of technology and cyber. So for us, what has changed in the last 5 or 10 years? These different groups, particularly the ones that we deal with in the financial sector, we used to have groups that were kind of crews that worked in isolation. What's different? And it's one thing. These guys, and this is a significant change, they all know each other, they all are collaborative, they all use Russian as a communications modality to talk to one another in an encrypted fashion. That's what's different. And that represents a challenge for all of us.
Alan then asked how we can stop the hackers.
Well, I mean, if we look at the Equifax hack, which is so relevant in the news right now, this was a simple error that was made by not providing the right general basic security practices on a server. And we're seeing, and this was a problem 20 years ago, and it's still a problem. So how do we get organizations to check the box and make sure that they're doing the right patching and they're doing the right updates and they're not being lazy when it comes to general security practices? And then the fact that we're hiring new people and we're putting them in important roles, we're giving them a computer, and we're not telling them what they can and cannot do. I mean, that's one of the biggest things that I find is the fact that many organizations don't want to take the time to educate their people on what they can and cannot do. And I think it's so basic to the day-to-day process of any organization.
Mike talked to you about human factors. And from our perspective, we pay a lot of attention to what the bad guys will use to further their own illicit gain. So they're very good at understanding human factors and what folks will click on. And so you heard me say earlier that convenience was the new nicotine. Well, let me tell you what the new caffeine is. The new caffeine, quite frankly, is curiosity. That's what makes you text on your phone when you're driving and you shouldn't be. That's what makes you look at that post. That's what makes you do that. So we're starting to see an emerging field of people who come from the scholars who come from the addiction community, who are starting to look at the relationships that we have with our phones as some kind of unusual behavior and attachment that mimics certain kinds of addictions. That's why you can go into any cafe in the United States and folks that should be sitting there talking to one another are doing this. Happens all the time. If you don't believe me, leave your phone in your room and try to go without it for 4 or 5 hours and see how you feel. So what has changed is that the technological sophistication and capability of the threat actors has increased. When Mike and I was a deputy director of the Department of Homeland Security National Cybersecurity Division nearly 15 years ago. And then the smart guy came in and held that position after me. But my point is this: the tool sets that you see today that are widely available would have been highly classified 20 years ago. And so, just in terms of sophistication has gone up exponentially. So I refer to this sometimes between hackers and law enforcement, people will call it cat and mouse. I reject that. To me, it's the old game of rock, paper, scissors. It is an adjustment to the last iteration. And so specifically, let's take a look at ransomware. In 2014, ransomware was the 22nd most popular crimeware application. In 2017, it's number 5.
The discussion moved on to cover digital currencies, such as Bitcoin, where the experts agreed that the digital transformation, with computers now ubiquitous, has created the ability for anyone to do anything anonymously. It also makes criminals harder to catch. They also agreed that outreach to local communities was important, something they all participated in, and then they answered questions from the audience of press and analysts. These covered a very wide range of topics, sadly too many for us to include here, but it was a fascinating insight into how the intelligence services are tackling one of the biggest social and business problems we face today. And with that, the session, which had attracted the full attention of the audience, was drawn to a close.